Hello, ako po si Paterno S. Makel at ito ang Newsbreak Chats. Dito sa Newsbreak Chats, dadalhin namin kayo sa likod ng kamera habang pinag-uusapan natin yung mga pinakamaiinit na issue sa nakalipas na 2 linggo. Ngayon makakasama natin ang dalawa sa pinaka-busy reporter ng Rappler sa nakalipas na hindi nga lang 2 linggo 3 linggo na bakbakan na coverage. Pero ngayon, medyo nakakahinga-hinga na ng konti. Konti lang, si Bea Cupin, ang aming Malacanang reporter, at si Sofia Tomacruz, ang aming Foreign Affairs reporter. Malacanang and Foreign Affairs. Siguro may idea na kayo kung anong pag-uusapan namin ngayon. Kasama kayo sa usapan na to. Pag-uusapan natin ang mga nakaraang biyahe ni President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. sa ASEAN, sa Cambodia, at sa APEC sa Thailand, pati na yung pagbisita dito ni US Vice President Kamala Harris ngayong linggo lang. So, welcome back to the newsroom, Bea and Sofia. After a while, ngayon lang tayo nakita-kita
Actually.
in person, in the flesh.
In a few months.
Welcome.
Sawadi
Yeah.
ka.
At kasama rin ako sa busy 3 weeks natin dahil syempre tayo yung magkaka-chat the whole time. Yeah, so ngayon, this is our time to look back
Yeah.
and bring our audience along with us as we look back. So, sisimulan ko muna kay Bea na una yung mga biyahe ni President Marcos sa Cambodia at sa Thailand. Bea, kamusta yung feeling na makasama sa presidential trip?
This wasn't hindi ito yung first na sumama ako, no? Pero ito yung kumbaga mas literally closer to the president kasi it was the first time na binuksan yung Malacanang ang PR-001 or yung presidential plane to members of the media. Konti lang kami na sumama sa trip, sa mismong plane going to Phnom Penh initially and again to Bangkok din. So yung dalawang summits na yon, may embedded na kumbaga para kaming traveling media.
Correct.
Parang
PR-001.
PR-001. So, interesting siya na experience because prior to this, syempre, medyo jet setter si President Marcos. As you recall, in early September, actually September, ang dami niyang biyahe, di ba? Back-to-back state visits and then New York for ONGA. Ngayon naman back-to-back din, dalawang biyahe sa Southeast Asia. So, yun, it was an interesting experience to experience sa presidential plane.
Oo, kasi dati yung mga biyahe ng Pangulo, kanya-kanyang punta yung mga media Or isang plane,
Yeah.
ibubok yung lahat ng mga kasama doon sa presidential trip. Pero hiwalay yung
Usually the day
eroplano
before.
ng Pangulo.
Oo. Kasama niya usually lang sa presidential plane yung delegation, ibig sabihin yung mga cabinet members na kasama or in President Marcos's case, his cousin, House Speaker Romualdez is almost always part of the delegation. At syempre yung mga PSG, PMS, pero for some reason, sabi sa amin kasi the president wanted to open it to media. So sumama yung mga MPC, Malacanang Press Corps, or yung mga relievers who were assigned to cover the summits.
So, kamusta? Ano ba ang relationship ni President Marcos sa media dun sa presidential plane?
Okay, so although same plane kami, syempre hindi naman literal katabi namin ng Pangulo. I mean, may section pa rin na andun yung pinaka-VIP or yung top
Correct.
officials ng delegation. Pero in the case of Phnom Penh, parang yung joke ko nga, parang kabubukas ko lang nung in-flight entertainment. Binabrowse ko pa lang yung mga movie na available. Biglang pagtingin ko sa distance, naglalakad na siya palapit sa amin to say hi. Pero yung say hi na yun, naging full ambush interview heading into Phnom Penh. Actually, interesting yun kasi doon niya sinabi na doon niya binanggit na yung nag-hint na magkakaroon siya ng meeting with Xi Jinping. Pero hindi niya confirm noon, although sinabi niya na he wants to talk about the South China Sea. Unprompted yun, by the way. Like, wala nagtanong na, i-meet mo ba si Xi Jinping? Siya nag-volunteer in a way na he was gonna meet. And then he confirmed several other bilateral meetings in the works during that ambush interview. So, it was interesting. But yun nga, yung hassle lang doon, quote-unquote, president, anything that involves the president, sobrang tad-tad ng protocol. So that includes, of course, the presidential plane. Like, ang daming clearances beforehand. So, syempre, ikaw mag-a-adjust. Wala ka namang choice kundi ikaw mag-adjust. So, yun. Yun lang yung interesting doon. Parang, kung yung boarding time mo, yung call time mo is much, much earlier compared to mga
Pero
commercial.
tama ba yan na prerogative of the president
Yes.
to allow, like, whether or not he'll decide
Yeah.
to allow media?
Yeah.
So, hindi siya rule or whatever.
No.
Each president gets to
I
decide.
understand during Duterte, the previous administration, according to the Malacanang reporters who covered him as well, parang walang binuksan ata na slots for media. During the previous admin to Duterte, kay the late President Aquino, some trips were open to media. Normally, kung tuhog daw, so kung sunod-sunod na bansa, in one, parang if you're not familiar, si the late President Aquino wasn't really fond of traveling. So rare din yung times na binuksan. Pero I believe when he traveled to Europe, it was open to the media.
So paano nakikipagbiruan ba si Pangulo sa inyo? Nakikipagtawanan?
Nag-viral yun, no? Yung comments niya about the food in Cambodia. Siguro yung interpretation mo kung why it went viral, it depends on which, on whether you like the president or not. Pero, medyo straightforward. Siyempre yung opening, pang warm up lang yun. Parang pagkain.
Yeah,
Sunod nun.
oo.
So, sino iba bilateral mo, sir? Ganon.
Kasi akala yata ng mga tao, yung relations ng reporter at ng source, palagi na lang, I am the reporter, you are the source, and you have to answer to me. But actually, there's a lot of light moments, di ba?
Tsaka syempre, hindi mo naman, parang ano na rin yun, bilang tao rin naman siya, it's not just the president, right? Like, any public official, parang, unless of course it's a formal setting, a press conference, normally sa mga chance interviews na to, unless, again, you're pressed for time, parang kumbaga icebreakers ka muna. Na parang,
Correct.
oh, sir, kamusta? Ganyan.
Masarap pa
magkikita ba-
kinain mo,
Oo, tas
ganyan.
Magbabilateral ba kayo? Ganun na. So, parang singit mo na kaagad yung... Kasi, yun din yung... It's also a balance because although you want, icebreakers, but you know na limited yung time and anytime the aides of the president could signal na tama na, balik na yung Pangulo sa seat niya. So, mga ganun. So,
Correct.
kailangan tansyain mo rin parang may oras pa ba akong sumingit ng isa pang tanong or parang aalis na ba to? So, yun.
Ikaw naman, Sofia, kamusta ka? Babalik mo lang dito sa Manila nung... Kahapon lang ba?
Yes, November 23.
Yeah, correct. 10:30 a.m.
Wow. Flight details, yes.
Kamusta? Nakatulog ka na ba?
Yes, oo naman. But, yeah,
Sana,
no.
di ba?
Daming deliverables.
Okay.
Just kidding. No. No, yeah. So, to your question din, no. Interesting din makakover ng isang vice presidential visit of a foreign leader this time. Interesting because it's been a while since we've seen a visit like this. Not just from the US, but from any high-ranking state official, no? Not only because of the pandemic, mostly because of the pandemic, but also because towards the latter half of the Duterte presidency, not as many high-ranking level, for example, ni US Vice President Kamala Harris visited the country. So again, like Bea, it was sort of a refresh in what coverage like that looks like. The energy was exciting to be able to be near these high officials and to be able to ask them questions. So, yeah, exciting and interesting to cover again.
Pero in contrast to Bea, hindi ba kasi sila Bea, pinasakay sa PR001.
Yes.
Pero alam naman natin ang pag-cover sa number one, embassies in general, sa mga foreign dignitaries in general, but most especially the United States. Hindi ba? So, what were the limitations? What, I mean, if you would compare it to
Actually, I
Bea's
mean,
experience.
yeah, if we're talking about limitations, in a way, yeah, exciting to be able to be in the energy of covering like physical coverage again. But because it's post-COVID, there are also so many more added restrictions this time na wala pa dun nung pre-COVID time. So sometimes people won't be able to join the event kasi may space limitations or daming kailangan extra requirements. But so at least in our part, there's also a lot of protocol and preps that went on behind the scenes and beforehand that we had to go through to be able to cover the visit of Vice President Harris. But also, I guess with these kinds of visits as well, you really don't know what the schedule is going to be like. So you are expecting to be able to cover, your hope is you're going to be able to cover everything.
Yeah.
But in reality, more often than not, you only get to cover several events.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she arrived Sunday, and we got the notice about the official dates, and we reported on it only
About a week before.
Wednesday, right?
Yeah, about a week
Wednesday.
before.
So we just had a few days to strategize and plan. But aside from that, hindi ba, Sofia, yung iyo ay sa Puerto Princesa sa Palawan, pero napakaraming ginawa dito ni Vice President Harris.
Medyo
Yeah.
intense
In
yung
fact,
schedule
kahit si
niya.
Bea,
Yeah.
sa
Madami.
Malacanang. So we had deployments. Sofia was in Palawan, and then there were reporters.
Yeah, covering all over Metro Manila.
Correct.
Yeah.
There was Dwight De Leon
Yeah.
covering the second
The
gentleman. There was Michelle Abad covering the meeting of Kamala Harris with women,
Yeah.
and Jairo Boledo, who was monitoring the
And Bonds.
meeting the activists, and Bonds, of
For the
course, who
arrival.
covered the arrival
arrival.
of Kamala Harris. And of course, Bea, nasa Malacanang,
Yeah.
monitoring the meeting
Yeah.
of Marcos
Yeah.
and
Sarah.
Harris.
And also the Vice President.
Vice President.
Yeah. Alam mo yung interesting or maybe what viewers might not realize how intense but also secretive but not for the sake of yung schedule. Minsan ang daming last minute changes, like in the case, like if you cover the a presidential trip, for instance, you don't really know the full schedule until normally the day before.
Or the night before.
The night before, actually. Hindi siya sinisekreto for the sake of. Siyempre, yung schedule ng summit, published naman yun. So, alam namin yung schedule ng ASEAN in Phnom Penh, for example. Alam namin na, okay, ito yung summit na ngayon, magkaka-China summit, US summit, Japan summit. Same with APEC, nakikita namin kung anong times yung retreats, yung tawag sa meetings sa mga heads of economy. Pero hindi namin alam yung mga singit-singit na schedule. And it's not so much because what you call this, madamot lang sila sa schedule. Pero minsan kasi, lalo na kung bilateral, di ba, Sophia, we talked about this. Ang daming last minute na nangyayari, parang uusog yung time, biglang hindi matutuloy, biglang matutuloy yung isang bilateral meeting. So parang, like for example, people, when I inform the desk, right, of what I'm gonna do, minsan may mga asterisk na depending on the schedule kasi di pa namin alam. So, di namin alam yung buhay namin normally until we arrive in the city. And then, yun nga, parang the Maro yung tawag doon, yung mag-usher ng media. They're an office attached to the Office of the Press Secretary. They guide us around when covering.
And schedules can change.
Yeah,
Just
for sure.
hours before, kahit 1 hour before.
Yeah.
And in the case of Bea, I had to instruct Bea to convert all times to Manila time para hindi maguluhan yung
Kasi
buong
1
Manila
hour.
team.
Ang hirap kasi yung 1 hour yun, kasi 1 hour lang yun eh. Pero, tapos parang naalala ko nung second day namin in Bangkok, or third full day, nag-running late. They were running late uncharacteristically kasi normally these summits talagang to the dot, right? I think na nag-run late yung isang meeting, yung arrival and then the first meeting. So, nadamay lahat ng bilaterals na pushback. So, okay lang. I mean, natuloy pa rin lahat ng bilaterals. Pero parang yung mga ganung bagay na parang on your toes ka rin kasi hindi ka sure kung anong mauusog or minsan magkapalit-palitan yung schedule ng Pangulo. So, syempre, because you're covering the President, mag-a-adjust ka. Wala naman tayong choice doon. Pero
That's one of the challenges in covering a presidential trip, a foreign trip. From your perspective, Sophia, what is one of the biggest challenges in covering a foreign trip?
I think it's aside from access, and not knowing what your day is gonna be like and how close you're gonna get, if you're gonna be able to ask questions, if you're gonna be able to ask these officials questions. I think another part of it is also going beyond like what the schedule lists.
Correct.
And trying to find out what in my case, yung visit ni Vice President Kamala Harris sa Palawan, figuring out what that means for Palaweños.
Yeah.
And going beyond just basically the messaging that let's say the White House and Malacanang is talking about. So in my case, we were there a day before. VP Harris arrived, and we wanted to figure out, well, first, what's the atmosphere like in the city? And it's a bit of a challenge when security is also really tight in the area beforehand.
Yeah.
But also, just, trying to figure out what it means to people there, if they're even aware of the visit.
Oo nga na.
And just, I guess, bringing more color to the story beyond official speeches and statements.
Yeah, because the protocol officers and the embassy and of course the organizers have their own agenda.
Yeah.
Pero syempre hindi naman tayo
Yeah.
kasangkapan sa kahit anong agenda. We have our news agenda. We have our editorial agenda, which is to serve the public best by helping them make sense.
Which I think is also a fun
The work.
part of it though. Yung not so much challenging or ikokontra mo yung nilabas nila, pero parang makikita mo rin in the case of the Malacanang, what the OPS or the press secretary, office of the press secretary, what they choose to release and what they choose not to release. For example, after the bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, napakatagal bago lumabas yung
Readout or press statement.
parang press statement na mas may laman. Parang unang nilabas ng Malacanang, ng OPS itself, na parang nagulat. Parang what they did was after the bilateral, they had an interview with the president. As in si OIC Chele Garafil yung nag-interview, tapos doon nagkwento siya. So yung naging unang labas ng Malacanang was na natuwa daw si Xi Jinping na andun si Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo in the bilateral. Pero walang actual meat of the discussion or broad strokes lang. They talked about regional issues. Ang daming regional issues na pwedeng pag-usapan. And then the next morning, although technically they released it early morning ata, past midnight or baka before midnight, nirelease ng Ministry of Foreign Affairs ng ng China. Mas may laman yung readout nila or yung release nila related to the bilateral. So, and that wasn't released by OPS.
Yeah.
Instead, it was through the DFA the morning after na mas may laman na yung statement ng Philippines or yung Philippine release kumbaga on the bilateral. So, interesting yun yung fun part siguro na parang, okay, sige.
Hindi na tayo lalayo pa. This week lang, si Kamala Harris and si Vice President Duterte nag-meeting.
Ayun din.
Ang laman nung merong nasa White House readout. The readout is the summary of the bilateral meeting. The bilateral, when we talk about bilaterals, the two leaders or two officials meet. So doon sa White House readout at sa Sara Duterte
OVP.
Readout, merong wala doon sa isa, di ba?
Yeah.
Can you give us one of those? Doon sa White House, ano yung one element? One element.
Quiz.
No, one element that was
Well, they talked a lot. Well, the White House readout did make mention of that human rights. was
Human rights.
discussed. But I mean, and Bea can also elaborate on this more. From the office of the Vice President, Sara Duterte, that wasn't part of the main highlights or discussion points between her and
hindi niya
No
sinama
mention
doon
of-
sa summary. No mention of human rights. But in the White House readout, it was there. Diba?
But I suppose that's also where you see
The priorities.
the priorities of each side. And in a way, well, accessible naman yung statements to everybody. That's also where you see, I think, how each side is talking to both an international audience and like a more domestic, their own domestic audience. So we know, for example, I think we can say the same for the statements of the meeting between Harris and Marcos. No, there was also a mention of human rights in the White House statement and also in
press freedom.
And press freedom in particular in the White House statement and also in the Philippine statement. But then in different ways, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's also something interesting to look at. But then we also, I think one important context to mention also is, for example, human rights is a very important issue, like in general, but also we're coming off of the last 6 years, no, from former President Rodrigo Duterte, and in those 6 years, American lawmakers were very, very vocal about the human rights situation in the Philippines. So on the one hand, I guess it hits you. You're hitting two birds with one stone. You're telling an audience in the Philippines that it was mentioned, but you're also telling an audience in the U.S. that
We brought this
mentioned
up.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
we
brought
brought
this
it
up.
up.
Don't you worry. We brought this up when we spoke to,
That was one of the missing elements dun sa Sara Duterte readout, diba? Yung human rights. But in the White House readout, there was something in the Sara Duterte, the
Yeah.
OVP readout, that was not in the
Yeah.
White House readout. What was that?
And I
Bea?
think that's what you can, parang yun yung catering to the Filipino audience.
Oo.
Parang pinakaunang point ng Philippine OVP readout was pinuri daw ni Vice President Kamala Harris, si Sara Duterte, for holding both posts as DepEd and as Vice President. So parang that was not present in the White House readout, which doesn't mean it didn't happen, pero from the White House's point, hindi yun important or it wasn't worth highlighting kasi these readouts are quite concise. Right? Although medyo mahaba-haba yung Marcos readout, mga umabot na.
mas mahaba din kasi yung meeting nila.
Totoo. Pero parang they're typically very, very concise. Like 4 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. In the case of the Duterte one, I think mga 1 paragraph lang ata yun na sobrang haba. So yun. Parang it also says a lot no, yung curation ng comms ng government, ng whichever
What they
government.
choose to highlight,
Yeah.
mga takeaways.
Yeah. Medyo nagkagulo nga tayo nun sa communication channels natin, hindi ba? Na bakit ito wala dito sa readout na ito? Bakit ito
And then
nandito?
even in the bilateral with China, like kami din in Bangkok, we were talking about like the media covering na parang di binanggit to, oo nga. Tapos parang may part din ng, yung interesting sa Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement ng China, may part doon, kasi normally, di ba, the press release will cover what was discussed. Pero may paragraph doon yung China na very carefully worded na it wasn't so much na the two countries agreed on this, but China is saying, ito dapat. I'll try to find it later.
This is like the bullying.
Yun, yung bullying line, yung mga lines na yun, it was phrased, in fairness, malinaw yung pagka-phrase ng China release na parang, it's not so much that we agreed on this, but China is saying that the two countries
Should work together.
should do
to
this.
stand up against
So parang,
bullies.
okay. Parang ano din siya. May very clear yung gusto na iparating ng China sa mundo through that release.
And so dito sa mga readout challenges na ito, may sinabi si Sofia dun sa Slack conversation natin. You mentioned something about readouts in general. That readouts are...
I mean, they really won't match
Yeah.
each other because, essentially what we've been talking about, no? Each government will have their own different priorities at iba din yung interest, kumbaga, like their national interest is not the same as our national
Correct.
interest. And so, I mean, these are where things are highlighted, no?
And I think that's where journalists really come in.
Yeah.
Because each government has its own propagandists,
Yeah.
its own PR machinery.
They have an angle. They want
Correct.
to push an angle.
And it is the job of the journalist to make sure that the public is not misled or not misled as much as possible.
Or they see the part that the government, whether maliciously or not, bury. They'll bury a lead. So parang our job is to bring that lead up. No, no. Ito yung important na kailangan nyong malaman. Na tinatry nilang, na binanggit nila pero tinatry nilang itago.
Or downplay. Yeah.
So the eyes of a journalist, the senses of a journalist. And so we go to what you felt was most striking. In your view, what was most striking during the presidential trips that you covered and the vice presidential trip of the U.S. that you covered? Maybe we can go with you first, Bea.
Okay, I have several things in mind, but siguro yung first, if we can play from the ambush, no, sorry, the coffee with the president yung term nun. Before the president leaves whichever country he's in, he normally hosts a conversation with media. Walang actual coffee. Pero he speaks to media. So let's hear him talking about bilaterals. So
It's just talagang
he was
pakiramdam
asked
mo muna.
about
Ano ba talagang problema?
he was
What do you
actually
want?
asked about
What
the
do I want?
outcomes
What
of the
can we do
bilaterals.
together?
Like kung may
What are the things that we
nakuha ba
cannot
na solid na
do?
deal, may mga
That's
napirmahan
really,
ba.
that's really what the
Um,
bilaterals
So yung sagot niya doon ay hindi,
That's not the
in
purpose
essence,
of
hindi
the
yun yung point
bilaterals.
ng bilateral meeting. At least in his
In my
world,
case,
or at least in his
because I'm the
context
new kid in town,
right now, in his
So,
first 6
it's
months
to meet
as
people
head
and
of
say,
state.
"Pakilala
So I
niyo."
think that's
So,
what,
in terms of
wrongly or correctly, that's how he perceives these trips, no? Hindi so much as to finalize these deals because they take a long time, right? Itong mga deals, not just with government to government, but deals also with businesses. They'll take months, years to negotiate. So yung parang pinaka-point ng Marcos admin at this point is really to introduce him to the world. And of course, bit-bit din doon yung kumbaga the baggage of a Marcos name. And I think Sophia discussed this in a story that she wrote months back, no, na parang more or less everywhere he goes, bit-bit niya yung infamy of the Marcos name. Minsan it works to his advantage in the case of countries like China even, Brunei, Saudi Arabia. He mentions nung bata siya, literal bata siya, binibitbit siya ng namesake, the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos. So parang good thing for some countries, tricky thing when you're talking to other countries siguro where the Marcos name at one point was pariah na, 'di ba? In the international scene. So yun yung interesting for me. It's really introducing himself to the world na, hello, I am Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Which he actually said in literal terms at the Onga, di ba?
Yes, like I am.
Yeah, my name is Ferdinand Marcos.
Jr.
So yun, interesting yun. And then I have another clip. This one naman, the content isn't very important because you can barely understand what they're saying. We actually don't understand the full context of what they're saying, but this was actually a clip released by the OPS because that part in Phnom Penh, this is also in Cambodia. We don't have access to this, but that's President Marcos speaking to President Biden on the sidelines of Phnom Penh of the ASEAN Summit. So bakit ko ito highlight? Kasi yung actual conversation, napaka-vague. I will follow up on plans. Parang, we'll follow up on what we talked about in New York. What did they talk about? We don't know. Kasi wala yun sa readout ng White House. Wala rin siya sa release ng Malacanang. So to me, what it means is they just want to show the world, they want to show the press covering the president and the Filipinos, syempre, na, tingnan mo, nakakausap ni President Marcos si President Biden. Parang he's building on the relationship that he started when they had a bilateral in New York. So parang, kasi yun nga, parang yung mga ibang reporters who perhaps weren't able to cover the bilateral between the US and the Philippines, they were like, ano tong deal na pinag-uusapan nila? Itong pinag-uusapan nila? Sabi ko, wala. Hindi natin alam. Hindi pa yan na-release ng dalawang gobyerno. In fact, if you listen to the clip, it's actually cut. I believe which implies na they might have actually spoken about details of whatever discussion that was. But yun, siguro yung last na lang
Can
na...
we listen to that clip?
Sige.
Let's listen to that clip. Tignan nga natin yung kanilang body language. And parang tinapik ni Biden si
No, I think that was...
Marcos.
It's either Biden or someone behind him. Yeah, and then that's Blinken over there.
We can discuss that in detail.
Sorry. And these things kasi we don't witness these things in person kasi separate yung media center from where the heads of state, heads of government convene. So ito talaga, these were released by Malacanang, aka therefore, parang sinadya talaga, like they want to send across a message, right?
This is their press release.
Yeah, I think this is their message na, look, he spoke to President Biden. They have, perhaps they're not buddies, but they're familiar with each other. And then you'll see this also, meron din pinost yung social media ni President Marcos. Pinost yung social media kasi he doesn't actually,
Yes.
I don't think he has time to
Yeah.
go on Instagram. But parang may shinare din sila na picture of him and Justin Trudeau having a sock show off. Like, that doesn't really matter. But it shows you that, they know each other. They're familiar with each other. Siguro last na lang din. This one is, if we can play it, actually, you can start talking about it. This is Marcos talking about New Zealand's Jacinda, did I pronounce that correctly? Jacinda Ardern. I also like single this out kasi yung soundbite na to was posted on Marcos's Instagram, and I think it's also a way to appeal to Filipinos because si Ardern nga sumikat dito, di ba? And not just here but the world because of how they handled the pandemic. So parang it's playing up or painting this image of a President Marcos who speaks to world leaders from all over.
On that point, I just remembered something. The Philippine ambassador to the U.S., Jose Manuel B. Romualdez,
Yeah.
he has a
Kompleto,
photo. For those of you who don't know his full name, no, he wrote about what he and I suppose other diplomats and people in the diplomatic circles perceive to be President Marcos's strengths.
Yeah.
Which is his articulateness and eloquence and his ability to be able to speak to converse with world leaders.
Yeah.
But I think you can look at it in two ways, no?
Yeah.
One is that again, we are coming on. We're following 6 years of Duterte, who didn't really like to travel much. Had a harder time interacting with leaders on the world stage. So to be able to have a president again who is able to chat up other world leaders
Casually.
throw around jokes like "I like your socks," "Look at my
Yeah.
socks," kind of thing, builds rapport. And
Yeah.
Paterno will know, or Paterno can talk about it more as well. Rapport is important when you're trying to talk about big world
Difficult
issues.
issues.
right?
Of
Yeah.
course.
And apart from that, well, may training din si President Marcos.
Well, and he
as-
he mentions it actually explicitly,
Yeah.
di ba? Parang yun nga parang when he spoke to Brunei during the bilateral with Brunei, parang nag-throwback siya. Yun din yung nangyari when he spoke to Saudi, na siya yung envoy. He made it seem like he was the envoy to negotiate oil, but I think basically bit-bit siya ng tatay niya to negotiate with Saudi back then in the 70s.
So he knows how to conduct himself already.
So, it's interesting. So parang yun nga, yung image painting niya is not just outwards to the world. Na this is me, I am Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Hindi lang yun. Parang ano din siya. Siyempre, may message din to the Philippines na, oh, look at me interacting with these world
Ako
leaders.
ang binoto ninyo.
Oo.
Ito ang nakukuha ninyo.
Yeah, parang ganun. Ganun nga. Parang yun nga, parang look at me, I can converse, what Sophia said, I can converse with them casually and both formally and casually.
Correct.
Yung mas tanong doon, so ano ngayon? Yun yung siguro yung next
Yeah.
question. So what? If you
Yeah.
can speak to these world leaders casually, what do we get from that? But hanggang doon muna yung messaging siguro na. Yun yung important in the first 6 months.
Yeah. Ngayon, pinakita sa atin ni Bea yung foreign trip si President Marcos. Lilipat ako kay Sofia. Medyo nakakagutom yata yung ipapakita sa atin ni Sofia dito.
Yeah, no. You asked a while ago, no? Ano yung mga striking images?
Striking images, yeah.
Yeah, from the trip of US VP Kamala Harris. Well, for me, isa lang yung striking image or photo moment, essentially. And this is when Harris visited the fishing community of Tagburos in Puerto Princesa. So just a brief context, why Tagburos? Well, this is a community that sees the effects of climate change on fishing and also the effects of illegal and unreported fishing. So if you see on screen, this is a photo of Harris talking to women in the community who have a fish dyeing business, aka dyeing in Danggit. It was a light moment where she visited the community, and we actually went back to that community when VP Harris left the Philippines because local reporters weren't really able to cover that specific event. So we went there and we talked to the woman. Her name is Jacqueline. We talked to her. We asked her, so how is it like to speak to the president? Vice president? Did you know that she was going to be the visitor you were going to face? And she said, I actually didn't know until 4 days ago, and I didn't think I would find out but they were probably so annoyed with how many times I had been asking, who the heck is visiting? Because why are you asking me to clean so much?
So ito siya, no?
Yeah.
Yung,
Si Jacqueline Relator. And
Jacqueline.
Yeah, so,
Buti napuntahan nyo siya pagkatapos ni Kamala Harris.
yeah,
finish.
medyo gabi-gabi na, pero we still made it.
Yeah. Medyo
yeah.
nakakagutom yung mga danggit.
So she was talking about ano yung pinag-usapan nila, and she was saying na Harris was saying that she was proud of her because Jacqueline was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first people to start a business, and she had taught other women how to do what she does, and she has around 15 other women who work in her fishing business with her. So, and this is also striking for me because I think this is a pretty clear image of what both the U.S. and the Philippines mean when they talk about this term, right? People-to-people ties.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll always hear that mentioned no matter who's visiting, no matter who's talking, even if it's a defense secretary, even if it's the state secretary, the president, or the vice president, perhaps even lawmakers, you'll always hear the saying, oh, we treasure our people-to-people ties. And I think that's exactly what it looks like. I personally, I find it hard to imagine this like similar scenes playing out with a different country or different let's say different officials visiting from a different country. They might have similar events, but then when you go back to the community, there's almost a familiarity with the U.S. that isn't the same with other countries. And I wanted to ask you about the Paterno because for those of you who don't know, Paterno also used to cover the DFA. And is it something that you share? So like, can you imagine this happening with other countries? With other
Yeah. McDonald's, KFC,
yeah.
Tim Hortons.
Tim Hortons is
Krispy
Canadian.
Kreme.
Hindi, pero inisip ko other countries nga.
Yeah, but in America, Fulbright, the OFWs. So kumbaga, what we have with America is not really just a diplomatic relationship. You're right, it's a people-to-people relationship. At ang mga Pilipino ang panghuli sa Pilipino ay hindi usually the cerebral or hard to understand stuff. But actually, pull the heartstrings.
Yeah.
We love our dramas. We love our telenovelas. We love our artistas. We love our images. And so if you show images like this, may danggit, hinawak-hawakan pa niya yung danggit, hindi ba?
Inuwi niya as a souvenir.
Oo, ang Pilipino mapapansin niyo, hinawakan niya yung danggit, inuwi niya yung danggit, kakainin ba nila yan ng almusal? Ganyan ang Pilipino. So, ang panghatak ng Amerika sa Pilipino, hindi lang yung mga pondo sa baril o pondo sa pagtulong sa vaccines. Ipakita mo na humahawak ng
Pressing the
danggit.
flesh, no?
Pakita mo na binaon niya. Kasi ang Pilipino ma-offend yan. Pag binisita mo tapos binigyan mo, hindi nagbaon ay ayaw niya. Nagkukunwari lang yan. Pero nagbaon. Pag ganyan, well, that says a lot about, the kind of relationship that we have and that America is trying to build with us. Really, people to people.
Kumbaga yung hearts and minds nga.
Hearts and minds. So, just wrapping up, Bea and Sofia, one quick question. Since sasagot nyo naman to throughout the show, very quickly, what face did President Marcos try to show the world during his trips to Cambodia and Thailand and during the trip of Kamala Harris to the Philippines? So, Bea.
What he is trying to show is parang kumbaga pinapanindigan niya yung friend of all, enemy to none rhetoric ng foreign policy ng administration niya. But I think aside from that also, and you can view this as a bad thing or a good thing, yun nga, but he's very comfortable traveling, right? And that's also, and he's not shy about telling the media na yung joke, yung hirit niya pa nung tinanong siya kung anong tinanggap mo na state visit, sabi niya all, di ba? Sabi niya also expect more of this, referring to yung mga powwows niya with media traveling with him. So, good thing or bad thing? Kasi good thing, parang, we have a president who can easily interact with these world leaders kung keso Western Global North yan, or powers, Asian powers like China, or Cambodia, or whatever. But at the same time, yung ginoke niya rin sa sarili niya, na sabi daw ni former First Lady Imelda Marcos of all people, no, infamous for her opulence also, hiniritan daw siya ng nanay niya na parang kailan ka ba nag-oopisina? So parang yun din yung parang yun nga, parang he projects this class na I'm a very well-traveled president. I've been well-traveled ever since. I'm at ease mingling with these powerful people. Pero yun din, yung parang, dami mong biyahe, sir. Parang ganun. Hey, yun.
Yeah. And the Marcos name, that is not the record holder for the most corrupt government,
Yeah.
the Guinness record holder, but
Yeah.
a new Marcos.
Yeah.
A new kind of Marcos that is embraced by the world.
Oo, parang yun nga. Yun exactly, like, this is a Marcos who embraces the world and who the world embraces back. Parang that's the image they want to project.
Thank you, Bea. What about you, Sofia?
Oh, for me, I mean, apart from everything Bea mentioned, no, I think we're seeing, well, Marcos, what face of Marcos now are we seeing? For me, it's hard to answer that question just thinking of Marcos alone, but like his role as president, I think we're seeing for the first time, oh, okay, ito pala yung chief architect of foreign policy that people always talk about. Because, like, I mean, travel is obviously going to feature as a prominent part of his presidency, so that so in that way he's really using the relationships we have with other countries to, well, yung sabi nga ni Ambassador Romualdez, it's really going to be a big part of his presidency, the economic diplomacy, and we haven't seen that for a while, I suppose. And on the flip side of what you mentioned about Marcos ready to embrace the world and the world embracing Marcos back, not just Marcos, but the Philippines, right? Because I think after with all the issues and challenges we're seeing in the world today, I think tumataas na din ulit yung profile ng Philippines. That a lot of countries see both the potential and I guess the strategic value of the country. And so it's hard not to embrace Marcos back.
Yeah.
Like, can you really not embrace him back when
With the US
there's beyond him, there's this country that has a lot of potential and a lot of it's a critical country in the region, which is a very critical region in the world. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sofia, Bea. Well, maganda yung mga naging usapan natin ngayon. And of course, yung sinubaybayan natin ay yung mga nangyari lang the past 3 weeks. Pero meron pa tayong 6 years to go, or 6 minus, ilan, Bea?
6.
5.5 years.
5.5 years to go. At marami pa tayong ganitong mga usapan sa mga susunod na pagkakataon at isasama namin kayo dito sa mga usapan namin. Ako po si Pater Newsbreak at ito ang Newsbreak Chats. Maraming salamat sa panonood. See you again.